How much do you think we could do in a long weekend in Albania? So here is a capital of a country I never thought I'd really come to. Well, not until quite late. Welcome to Tirana, Albania. Albania, a country that proves you can go from being a hermit kingdom to something just a little bit more open. So a quick modern history of Albania for you. Following World War II, Pasha became the dictator that ruled over all of Albania and closed this country up like a hermit kingdom that made North Korea look open. So paranoid was Hoxha about people invading. All of the metal spikes used by the vineyards had to have sharpened tips in case paratroopers came down so they would be impaled. There are concrete bunkers spread all over the countryside of Albania because Hoxha desperately feared invasion. Little did he know that no one wanted to come here anyway. By 1992, Berisha took power and his government was so incompetent it allowed a whole series of financial pyramid schemes to be created. And by 1996, 1997, these pyramid schemes collapsed and the entire country fell to pieces. So Albania, to a lesser extent than Bosnia and Serbia, was the key territory fought over between the Christian empires and the Ottoman Turks. And the sway back and forward across the Balkans for that 500 years, where the Balkans acted as that front line between those two great religious empires, Ottoman Muslims and particularly Venetian Christians. So let's talk Islam for a second. For 500 years, Albania was under the control of the Ottoman Turks and of course was Islamic. Under communism, of course, all religion was abolished ineffectively. So when communism collapsed, religion has come back, but not in a strong way. It's nominally 70 or 80% Islamic, about 20% Orthodox, and the rest something else nominally. But in reality, in the way people dress and behave, it's not a strictly Islamic country. In fact, it's very, very relaxed when it comes to religion, and intermarriage is not uncommon here. This mosque was built in 1821, so not that old in Albania's Islamic history. The clock tower next door, the clock tower was built in 1822. Built by Sultan Mehmet II. Sultan Mehmet was known as the Conqueror. In 1502, this is the oldest Islamic building of worship in Albania. I'm in the World Heritage protected town of Berat in central Albania. Berat is World Heritage as it's one of the finest examples of Ottoman architecture left over from the 17th and 18th centuries. Berat is known as the city of 1,000 windows because of that sort of architecture, which looks down upon the river that flows gently through this town. One of the interesting things around about Berat is the castle on the hill and the village that still lives within the castle's walls are entirely Christian, and indeed entirely Christian Orthodox, and it shows the very good and strong link that exists still between the Serbs and the Albanian Christian Orthodox population. Behind me here is a 16th century Orthodox church. That's amazing when you think about it. The Ottoman Turks left all of that Christian structures intact when they had a garrison here looking after Berat. Here in Berat you learn one of those things about Albania as a tourist destination. Look how many there are. Imagine if you walked out of your house here in Albania and you walk into your back garden and this was your back garden. Yes, before the Venetians, or before the communists, and before the Venetians, and before the Byzantines, there were the Romans who lived here. This amphitheatre could hold between 15 and 18,000 people and was built in the 2nd century AD. Dures, Albania. The word in Albanian for sale is Shitet. And you can imagine the real estate agents who are wanting to sell these houses here. Shitet for sale. And what's your view over? A 2,000-year-old amphitheatre. John O'Haydon, that beats a century-old renovated timber benchtop. You might think it's weird that literally in the middle of a Roman amphitheatre is inhabited houses. The reason for that is this amphitheatre was only discovered in 1966. After the Romans, here in Durrës came the Byzantines, and this is an old chapel underneath the amphitheatre here. And here in the chapel is some wonderful old mosaic art, and there's some really interesting questions that come from this, because what this little chapel does is it shows a lot of religious and artistic transition from the Roman through the Byzantine times. Question then is, how old is this stuff, these mosaics? You might be tempted to say that it's 4th or 5th century. Now, why 4th or 5th century AD? Well, this amphitheatre was built in about 200. The Byzantine Empire, or the Roman Empire, converted to Christianity in about 300. And these are old Roman style mosaics, so you might think 4th, 5th century, something like this. The thing is, underneath, if you look in the top corner, you can find old frescoes written or painted in blue, and through different techniques and x-rays they've seen the pictures underneath those and been able to date them through the stories to around about 800 or 900. So the thinking is that these mosaics might be from around about the 11th century. And that's what makes this particularly exciting, because normally in old Roman ruins that have transitioned through Byzantium and into the Ottoman Turkish period, they've been painted over or destroyed. But because this wasn't found until 1966, this is left intact from 1,000 years ago. The other thing we know about this piece of artwork is it was paid for by a donor named Alexander, because we've got two little figures in the bottom left-hand corner and the mosaic saying give thanks to Alexander. We're not meaning Alexander the Great, of course, that was 300 years before Christ. But up in the top right-hand corner we've got a reference to Sophia, of course, one of the most important churches over in Istanbul, Constantinople, Byzantium as it's been known in its time, is the Hagia Sophia. So this fella Alexander either lived here or lived in what is now Istanbul, and part of his give back, part of his donation, was to make this little mural in this chapel, presumably for local dignitaries or even the emperor. So Durrës Castle. This castle was first built during the Hellenic years, the times of Alexander the Great. By the way, a little known piece of fact, Alexander the Great, is he Greek? The Greeks say so. The Macedonians say he's Macedonian. In truth, he was born in Albania. Anyway, this castle was built in Hellenic times, built on by the Romans, then the Byzantines, then the Venetians, then the Ottomans. These walls speak the history of the Roman Empire and the Christian-Turkish clashes down to the present day. If you had a Byzantine-era wall in your back garden, wouldn't you use it for a clothesline? At the end of Durrës' walls is a turret built by the Venetians when they were here in the 15th century. And what have the Albanians done with this turret? Oh. Yep, 15th century tower top bar. I'm on the edge of Lake Kombalar, which is in the Kombalar National Park here in central western Albania. The coast is not far, just over there, but this is a lake. And it sums up a lot of things about Albania here for me. It's not what I expected. I expected a much more frontier western gung-ho recovering from communism type state that you find in a number of other former Eastern Bloc countries. But not this one. It seems to have put communism behind it. You don't see the shops selling the tacky communist souvenirs and the old badges to Hoxha or things like that you see in Serbia or Russia or Lithuania. No, this is a country that seems to be doing a lot of economic recovery, but in its own way. Three main sources of income: remittance funding, expatriate workers sending money home, and you see that manifesting in a lot of family unit blocks getting redeveloped, new houses, solar heating, fresh paint, funding from the European Union, and funding because they're members of NATO. But this doesn't seem to be an economic recovery where the multinationals are pulling in. It seems to be a lot more organic, a lot more Albanian. Albania still seems to be the place that people haven't quite tweaked to yet, with beautiful coastlines, national parks like this one, and a very laid-back attitude. You know, a lot of the people love the Adriatic coast and go to Italy or now even Croatia. At some point, the Adriatic coast of Albania has to open up and become popular to people other than Albanians. It really is a surprisingly pleasant country. And one of the things we've noticed here is people are extremely friendly. They come up and talk to you in the streets, but there's no sense of, oh, here's another tourist, another walking wallet to pinch money out of. So there's none of that development here. It's just people who are genuinely, openly friendly. And just to show that the Albanians are getting a wriggle on, this is the Durrës Albanian Institute, soon to be opened. Yeah, I like this place. It's got a really laid-back feel. They've put all of communism behind them. I kind of wish we were here for a couple of weeks. It would be nice to sort of amble from north to south or south to north instead of this 3-day rush we're doing. It's a pretty cool country. You know, about 300 meters that way is the border with Montenegro. This is the largely unspoiled Adriatic coastline of Albania. I say largely unexploited or largely untouched, because if you look really closely, you'll find lots of rocks set up in what I can only assume are military embankments left over from the Hoxha years, 20 years ago, when everything had a bunker. And this had to be one of the potential axes of advance if, for some reason, Montenegro wanted to invade Albania. And now I see signs everywhere saying shitet. And shitet is the Albanian word for sale. And British citizens can buy land here. So, I'm really tempted. Never know, I might become a hermit one day and live just there. Greetings from Albania. Behind me is the entrance gate to the Topkapi Palace. For half a millennium, that was the centre of power over most of the known world. A half millennia long battle between Ottoman Turks and Venetian Catholics swayed backwards and forwards over Europe, marking most of today's modern borders and setting the stage for what is the conflict between Islam and Christianity. If you listen to the Americans, you'd think that's a new conflict, but in fact it's not. Right from the days of Suleiman, one of the early and great emperors of the Ottoman age, the whole question of what do you do between what was then Orthodox Christendom in their empire, moderate Islam and radical Islam, was something that was centre stage and top of their rulers' minds. Ottoman Turks were always moderate Muslims. If you doubt that, think of this. Of the 5 pillars of Islam, one of the most important is the Hajj. And not a single one of the Ottoman emperors did the Hajj, even though they had the means and even though they controlled the territory. more than any other building, this one, the Hagia Sophia, sums up the issues around religion and Istanbul. Built by the Byzantines in Old Roman Byzantium, it was initially an Orthodox church. Constantine the Great converted the Roman Empire to Christianity, and this was the centre of the Eastern Roman Empire. After the Ottomans took over Constantinople, they converted this to a mosque, and for 500 years this was the largest mosque in all of the Islamic world. And then 1935, Ataturk converted it to a museum, secularized this building that had been the largest Christian place of worship, the largest Islamic place of worship, and is now an incredibly important secular museum. Think about this also when you think about the Hagia Sophia, that for half a millennium this was the largest mosque in Islam, and for that 500 years all of the Christian mosaics were left intact. Now, if that doesn't convince you that there was a harmony or a tolerance within the Ottoman Empire, nothing more. I'm now in the Sultan Mehmet, or Blue Mosque. It's the twin to the Hagia Sophia. It caused somewhat a controversy in the 15th century when it was being built, 16th century, because it has 6 minarets. Up until then, only sultans were allowed to build a mosque with 4 minarets. Princes were allowed to build a mosque with 2, and normal people would build a mosque with 1 minaret. But this has 6. And it wasn't until the Sultan Mehmet, agreed to build 1 additional minaret in Mecca was the controversy solved. This has very fast become my all-time favourite swimming pool across the world. Welcome to Beirut in Lebanon. Perhaps for most of last century, Beirut and Lebanon were the bywords for conflict. But when you go back even further, this country has within it cities that claim to be amongst the oldest half dozen in the world, some of the earliest human settlement, and some of the finest Roman ruins. Put preconceptions aside, let's do a quick tour of Lebanon. This beautiful garden is in the Jetta Grotto in Lebanon, a little bit north of Beirut. It's a beautiful garden, and the whole Jetta Grotto is stunning, with beautiful stalactites and stalagmites, one of the largest underground cave systems in the world, with one of the largest stalactites in the world. G'day, I'm in Byblos, the biblical town of Gebal. It's about, 40 kilometres north of Beirut, or about an hour and a half's drive by some pretty nasty traffic. And this one town in many ways represents the history of the Mediterranean. Archaeologists say that there's been habitation here for at least 7,000, possibly 8,000 years. By the 3rd millennium BC, this was the busiest port in all of the Mediterranean, controlled by the Phoenicians. And although it's hard to determine exactly how our modern alphabet came to be, the scientists believe, the archaeologists believe, that this town is one of the potential places where the modern alphabet was created in or around the 2nd millennium BC. There's also a beautiful ruin of an old Roman theatre, and these walls are the walls of a Crusader castle built 910 years ago in 1104, in part using old Roman columns as the headers for the wall. And this is one of the places that claims to be amongst the 2, 3 or 4 oldest human population centres, cities known. So in all this history, did I forget to mention The Greeks. After all, it was the Greeks that changed the name of this city to Byblos in 333 BC. Some bloke named Alex. You know, I feel for the Lebanese. Here I am sitting in a small old Roman theatre overlooking a beautiful sunset in a town that has been ruled by Phoenicians, Persians, Arabs, Greeks, Romans. A town in which potentially the Phoenicians invented the modern alphabet, which has all this great history. And there are bugger all tourists. And there are bugger all tourists because people are scared to come to Lebanon, particularly with what's happening next door in Syria. Spare a thought for the Lebanese. Everyone, including the Lebanese, have fought here for thousands of years, and every time it looks like peace is about to settle, someone else comes in and whacks them over the head. And just think about the poor buggers today. 3/4 of their land border is with Syria, with Islamic State wanting to come in. And the only other bit is with Israel, our sworn enemy. But at least the other bit has that. As you hit South Lebanon, the feeling of the place really changes. A lot more pictures of sheikhs, a lot more Islamic paraphernalia around, and of course there's the UN peacekeeping mission, UNFIL. I'm now in Tyre. Tyre is an old Roman town built on a Greek one, built on a Phoenician one, built on an Egyptian one. The road that I'm walking down was paved by the Romans about 2,000 years ago, but there's been settlement in this town since 2750 BC, and it's in southern Lebanon. If central Lebanon has no tourists, southern Lebanon has even less, because there's great fear here about, well, predominantly an Israeli attack or a Hezbollah attack on Israel. Who fires first? Who knows these days? Anyway, this is another example of magnificent Lebanon, great Roman history, and if you like this sort of stuff, you can wander it all by yourself. I do like history because amongst all of the things you start to ask yourself, who walked down the same street that you're walking down now? Emperor Hadrian walked down this very street on these very stones. I'm now walking down the town centre footpath, raised above the road in front of the monumental arch, and lining it all the shops that you could imagine would have lined the side of the road here, leading towards the Hippodrome, where all the entertainment would have taken place. You can just imagine, can't you? Emperor Hadrian coming down the road through the monumental arch and then swinging a left-hand turn to go in here, which is the Hippodrome. I'm now underneath the stands of the Hippodrome, and as you walk underneath, there are all these little shop spaces where they would have sold the Roman equivalent of Coke and chips and a 4 and 20 pie. I love these old stadia. You can just feel the footsteps on game day. And as you walk up the stairs to the stands, it doesn't feel too much different from mounting the top of the Great Southern Stand, except there's 2,000 years of difference in the construction. Yeah, it's a 2,000-year-old column. Sun's about to go down, and here we are in a 2,000-year-old Hippodrome. Roman chariot racing track, essentially. Flat down that end, curved down that end, and you can just imagine Charlton Heston riding around. There's a whole tourist infrastructure built here in Tyre. Plenty of room for cafes, restaurants, museums, shops, and it's supposed to be that. The problem is, it's missing just tourists. It's not because the attraction's no good, the attraction is magnificent. But who the heck wants to come to Lebanon right now? Think about what Lebanon could do if it got its politics sorted out. I mean, this is the Mediterranean coast, which on the other side, with the sun on your back, people pay a fortune to sit on stones in Nice. Or you could see the same view, but with the sun warming your face here. Let me say this about Lebanon. It's not like the Islamophobes would have you think. Indeed, Lebanon is a mixed country. But people here are friendly, welcoming, smiling, always wanting to give a hand. And it's not like every second person's a member of Hezbollah that wants to bundle you off into a black van, dress you in an orange tracksuit, and then cut your head off in front of the cameras. It's not like that at all. It's well worth coming to. And to be on an open beach in the sunset in front of the Mediterranean, just down the road from 2,000-year-old ruins. If only they could get themselves fixed up and Syria left them alone and Israel left them alone and everyone left them alone to get on and just be Lebanon. Here's something special about Beirut. The old Roman town. A mosque, a church, a Catholic church and an Orthodox church. All together. This is St. George's Orthodox Church in the middle of Beirut. It's the first time I've seen Christian iconography with the scripts underneath written in Arabic. I'm standing outside the National Museum of Beirut. The National Museum sits right on the old green line that separated the warring factions during the Lebanon Civil War. And an amazing job was done when the war finished in 1991 to rebuild and reconstruct this museum. Inside there are a number of really beautiful examples from each of the epochs of history that are covered here. The Greeks, the Romans, the Phoenicians. Not only does this museum have some really fine examples of all the epochs of history, it was so well protected during the Civil War. I mean, this museum is right on the green line where the fighting factions fought, but brave actions of archaeologists building concrete blocks around all the really beautiful examples, preserved them. And as if you didn't think Byblos had enough history, archaeologists believe that the start of the Copper Age is marked from Byblos, because it's from there they found the first tools that were used in copper. Fishing hooks. The bullet marks and the pock marks on the walls inside the museum show just how close the fighting came. In fact, the fighting was here. While it may be over 20 years since the Civil War finished, and the hustle and bustle has well and truly returned back to Beirut, there is evidence both of ongoing construction, but also the remnants of the Civil War dotted throughout the city in pockmarked and damaged buildings. So how does one explain the Civil War here? Well, 18 religious groups, from Druze to Christians, both Catholic and Orthodox, Muslims, Shia and Sunni, and a whole bunch of others. By 1949, the last of the French troops had left, but they'd left a constitution in which, at a roughly ratio of 6 to 5, the Christians dominated the Muslims in the parliament. That 6 to 5 ratio came from the 1932 census. Anyway, following the creation of Israel, there was a huge movement for pan-Arabism, and the Arabic Islamic parts of Lebanon wanted to push for and create pan-Arabism. The continued overflow of Palestinian refugees was upsetting the power balance inside Lebanon as the Islamic proportion of the population grew. It was 1975 in which the Civil War really started, when a whole bunch of Christians murdered a busload of Muslims. The Islamic community in retaliation murdered a whole bunch of Christians, who in retaliation murdered a whole bunch more Muslims, and soon it became completely out of control and one of the bloodiest conflicts ensued. Israel supported by the United States, invaded from the south to protect their territory. Syria came in from the Syrian side to protect their interests, and you had a 15-year-long civil war as a result. While I sit in this old Roman ruin, and a fishing boat slowly makes its way to port as the sun sets over the Mediterranean. Time to say goodbye from Lebanon.